Good evening. This is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Carrots. Today is Sunday. That means we're in the New Testament. Means we have a live audience. It is September 3rd. We have a holiday coming in a couple of days. No, tomorrow I guess is our holiday. 2017. On Sunday nights we're in the New Testament. On Wednesday nights we're in the Old Testament. We're studying the chronological New Testament. We will go back to the regular Bible and out of chronology when we get out of the Gospels. But as long as we're in the Gospels, we're going to discuss all these same things that are happening. In a little bit, we have maybe a few minutes, I'm going to guess about 10 or 15. And then we get into the triumphal entry, which we call Palm Sunday. Now, I told you that when we got to Palm Sunday, in our regular study of the New Testament, I would go over it some, but not as much in depth as I usually do, for the simple reason that we did that in the spring. All right, we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke all write about blind Bartimaeus and a friend that are healed. None of them say anything that the other one doesn't. So I'm going to read one and then just quickly go over the next two. Matthew is in Matthew 20, verse 29. And they departed from Jericho. Now Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. We're going to get a lot. When we get up to Palm Sunday, we have only 5 days before Calvary. A lot of what happened in those 5 days is written in Scripture. So it's going to take us a lot more than a week, a lot more than a month, just to do that particular portion. We go sometimes a few months in which we have one or two things that the gospel writers tell us about. But they're leaving Jericho. Jericho is when you're standing on a high part in Jerusalem, you look down and you can see the city of Jericho. Jericho is just north of where the Dead Sea is. In our Wednesday night Bible study, in probably about 2 months or less, we will get into the actually taking the Ark of the Covenant, all the furniture, etc., crossing the Jordan River opening up. When we do that, we are just one city away from Jericho. Jericho is one of the larger cities. A great multitude followed. Hi, Larry. I just switched, Larry, because I didn't see you. I know it's a busy day and a busy time. I'm glad you made it. They departed, and a multitude followed him. They're not anywhere near the temple. Bethlehem is, I would say, 4 or 5 miles from south of Jerusalem. Jericho is considerably farther. I wasn't driving, so it's been 50 years, so and I wasn't driving, so I'm not that good on how many miles, but they are not near where the religious leaders in the temple or the other leaders that we hear about during the death of Christ are. So the multitudes are a little bit more free to follow. 2 blind men are sitting by the wayside. They're blind, but they hear. When they heard that Jesus passed by, they didn't hear him passing by. They heard that he was passing by. Either somebody used his name or somebody made a comment to somebody else, but they're blind. And they now know that Jesus is nearby. They, both of them, cried out, "Have mercy on us, O Lord, thou Son of David." Okay, I understand, Granny. And you realize that when I made the change, um, and people aren't free to comment and discuss what they want to discuss, you realize that we know what happens, right? Jesus is called by 2 blind men the Son of David. Now they're Jewish. David has been dead. Well, his son ruled 40 years after him. And then we had the divided kingdom. And then we had 70 years. David's been dead over a few hundred years. They're calling Jesus the Son of David. Why? Because it is prophesied and taught in the Old Testament that Messiah will come from the lineage, the genealogy, the line of David. And Jesus really fit the bill. Mary comes from one of David's sons we don't know a lot about. His name was Nathan. So Mary is a descendant of David. She would be an offspring, a daughter of David. Her son would be a son of David. That takes care of the biology. What about the legal side of Jesus? The angel told Joseph when he spoke to him in a dream, don't be afraid to get married to Mary. She hasn't been unfaithful. She will have a child and you will name him Jesus. Why is Joseph going to name Jesus by that name? He's not the father. Legally he is. Even today, unless you change it in the United States, if a woman has a son and is married, her husband is the presumed father and is the legal father. And unless you want to have a DNA test, which hasn't been possible for all that many years, I can remember I was a court interpreter when we didn't have DNA. So Joseph is the legal father. Women didn't talk, especially in the temple. So when they would have brought Jesus to be circumcised at 8 days and later to be named at 40 days, the priest would have said, what is the child's name? And Joseph would have said, His name is Jesus. So Jesus is the legal son of David, and Jesus is the biological, through Mary, son of David, who is Nathan. Joseph, which one of David's sons is he out of? Of course, the one who was king, Solomon. If they were not married, if Mary was still living at home with her parents, and the time for Jesus' birth drew nigh, and Mary was living with her mother and father, and the Roman government said, every one of you go back to the land of your people, Mary would have gone back because Bethlehem was the city of David, and she's out of Nathan, David's son. Joseph would have gone there because he's biologically and legally out of David through David's son Solomon. These two people, these two blind people, know enough of the Old Testament to know that Jesus is the son of David. They say, have mercy on us, son of David. If he wasn't who he was, why have mercy? What good could he have done to them? He could have done them no good. But because he was Jesus, the Son of God, he was also out of the lineage of David. And every Jew that knows Israeli history knows that. So these two blind men know that. The multitude rebuked them and said, shh, 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 hold your peace. The multitude told him this. Now we've read in the past that sometimes the disciples did the same thing. Some kids were hanging around Jesus and they were bugging him or something. And the disciples said, get rid of those kids. They're bugging the Lord. And Jesus picked them up and said, suffer the little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. Said they should hold their peace. But they cried more, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, thou son of David. And Jesus stood still and called them and said, what will ye that I should do for you? Oh, you want me to do something for you? You're calling me son of David. You've got the right person. What do you want me to do for you? They say, but that means both of them. They say that our eyes may be opened. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. And immediately their eyes received sight. And they followed him. How many people do you know that have gotten a miracle from God, or their sins forgiven, or some huge blessing in their life? A few days later, where are they? We read not that long ago where 10 came and were healed. One came back to say thank you. Both of these men now become disciples, not one of the 12 disciples, but the word disciples means someone who follows another person to learn from them. I'm going to read from Mark. Mark 10 gives the same story. And Jesus stood still when he heard the words, "Thou son of David, have mercy." And they called the blind man, saying unto him, "Be of good comfort, rise, he calleth thee." He rose, casting, lost my place, his garment, and rose and went to see Jesus. And Jesus said unto him, "Go your way, your faith has made you whole." And immediately his sight, and they followed Jesus. Now we got a little difference here. Hi, cowboy. Haven't seen you in a while. Um, one place it said he touched their eyes, and another one said, "Go thy way, your faith has made thee whole." We have two different things. Well, let's look at what Luke says, and then discuss that. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. By the way, in the early New Testament days, they referred to Christians as being people that were in the way. Now, that doesn't mean get out of my way. You're in my way. In fact, one of the early modern versions of the Bible that I have is called The Way. Because in those days, they didn't say Christians, they didn't say followers of Jesus. Jesus had not yet died here and been resurrected. But people who were following him were saying, "Oh, those are people that are in the way." Luke says, they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passed by. And he cries, say, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." Luke is saying that they called him the son, or at least one of them called him the son of David. But he also calls him Jesus. And some tried to rebuke him, but he said, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stood up and commanded him to be brought to him. They have to bring him to him because they're blind, or guide them to him. And Jesus said unto him, "Receive thy sight. Thy faith has saved thee." He received his sight. He followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto God. We got slight differences. Why do we have slight differences? Well, we have Matthew, we have Mark, and we have Luke writing about it. Matthew was there. Matthew had been a tax collector. And remember that, because the next person we're going to talk about is also a tax collector. Matthew was one of the 12 disciples. Who was Mark? Do you remember that when Peter and James were in jail, the angel let them out? All the Christians went to the home of a widow and they were praying. When they got out, they went and they knocked on the door. Somebody answered the door and said, ah! And instead of letting them in, runs in and says, hey, everybody, he's out. They're out. The son of the woman who owned the home, his name was John Mark. They called him John Mark or just Mark. He, at the time these two blind men are healed, was not following Jesus. He did not see this. Now, I told you, Matthew was one of the 12. And we read that they departed from Jericho and a multitude followed them. Matthew was there. Mark didn't. Let's go to Luke. Who in the world is Luke and how does he know anything? You probably have heard Luke was a medical doctor. They didn't do surgery in those days, but they put stuff on you and cut things out of you, opened up small wounds and things like that. But he was a very intelligent, extremely intelligent, especially of the writers of the New Testament. Beside Paul, Luke was extremely brilliant. He was an evangelist. The Apostle Paul was over all of them, gave them instructions. Luke is the one that talked to almost everybody that knew anything about what had happened in the life of Jesus and what they eventually wrote about. But 2 of the 3 people were not even there. Luke, I often refer to him as the investigative reporter. I've got, sorry, I looked at something on the screen and I read it. I should look at the other screen that doesn't have writing on it. Luke talked to absolutely everybody, including when Luke talks about feelings, especially the feelings of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Luke has talked with her. Now, these fellows did not write immediately. Of the 3, Mark was probably the first one who wrote anything down. And that was 35 and 35 is 70. At least 30 years after it happened, and probably a few more. I'm going by the fact that the city was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70. Okay, we now come to the conversion of Zaccheus. Granny, do you know the little song? I'm asking you partly because you're not as old as I am, but you've been around a while and you've been in church. Do you know the song about Zaccheus? Zaccheus was a wee little man. You do know it? And a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, the Savior for to see. And as the Savior passed his way, he said, Zaccheus, come down. I'm going to your house for tea. Okay, Luke is the only one who writes about this. We're going to find that Zaccheus is a short little man. I have a friend, a dear friend, a man who is 5'1". His wife, I think, is 5'8". They live about 10 miles from me, but we have like one day it'll rain here and not rain in their town, or we'll get a little snow. Now, when it's bad, we all get rain. When it's bad, we all get snow. But sometimes one of us will get more than the other. And certain streets don't get plowed. Thank you, Granny. Certain streets don't get plowed. And he didn't make it to church. And I did one Sunday morning. So this is recent because it's only been this calendar year of 2017 that I haven't had a morning broadcast. And I was there. And the pastor mentioned this. And I called my friend. And sometimes they just let the machine take a message. And when the message turned on, I knew he was there. I said, if you don't pick up the phone, I'm not going to tell you what the pastor said about you this morning. But when the pastor mentioned this, that Zaccheus was a short man, he said, oh, I don't see brother, so I won't mention his name, I don't see brother so-and-so here today. Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. We just read that Jesus had departed from Jericho. Now here, he's going through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zaccheus who was not only a publican, he was the chief publican, and he was rich. How did those guys get rich? And I want to say hi to those that are on page 1, and you're viewing this only because we're being featured. You can always come and visit us anytime. As soon as I get through teaching, I will open that up for chat for everybody. We don't have chat while I'm teaching because you don't chat when the preacher's preaching. But later we will, and you're always welcome to come back to Preacher with Parrots. Okay, now, he was rich. How did he get rich? Well, I had an uncle who was a tax collector. He worked for the county, and he was told how much to charge the people, depending on what kind of house they lived in. These guys got their pay by getting out of the people what they needed, plus they added some on top for them. And some of them added an awful lot, and you could get very rich. So Zacchaeus was the chief of the publicans. Matthew, in our previous story, was not the chief. He was just a tax collector. This one is rich. He sought to see Jesus, who he was. He could not for the press. That means there were a lot of people pressing in. There were so many people around Jesus that he couldn't get through the crowd because he was little of stature. He was short. And he ran before. He saw up ahead there was a tree. Jesus is walking down the road and he's talking, and people are all around him and they're walking close to him so they can hear him. And this little Zacchaeus says, if I run down the road and get in that tree, they're going to have to go under that tree. And during that time that they're going under the tree, I'll see and I'll hear what's being said. He climbed into the sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he saw him. And he said, Zacchaeus, make haste, that means hurry, and come down, for today I must abide at your house. Jesus was, I'm experienced at abiding at people's houses. For 7 years, I was an evangelist. I didn't have any home, anywhere to go except with the trailer I was pulling. Occasionally or frequently, churches wanted a revival for 2 or 3 weeks. Now it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, if you're lucky. Um, but it used to be 2 or 3 weeks, and churches, if they were good churches, big churches that could afford it, many had 4 revivals a year. Most of them had at least 2, and all of them had at least 1. But many wanted to start and end on a Sunday. So if I preached a 2-week revival, that means I preached 3 Sundays. I preached a Sunday in that week, and a Sunday in that week, and I ended on the next Sunday. Well, if the next pastor didn't want to start till Sunday, that meant I had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That I had to park my trailer somewhere, had to go down. It was much easier than it is now. Now you can't just park on the street or next to a church. You've got to have permits. It's nothing the way it used to be. But I could pull up almost anywhere and not have a problem. But we had a lot of friends. And at that time, our district council, which is Spanish language based, was in 40 of the 48 lower states. Well, we were actually in Hawaii and in Alaska too. I've preached in both of those places. But we traveled a lot. In all of these places, we met some people that we really became friends with. So we've spent Monday through Fridays once or twice a month in a lot of people's homes. And Jesus would do the same. At 3, 4 o'clock, you start figuring, okay, where am I going to spend the night? Well, Jesus has now made up his mind. He's going to spend the night with Zaccheus. Make haste, and came down and received him joyfully. Zaccheus is happy to receive Jesus into his home. And when they saw it, they murmured, saying that he was going to be a guest with a man that's a sinner. I get so sick and tired of what people think other people should be doing. You've heard me say, especially if you're a new Christian, especially if you've had difficulty with some bad habits that you're trying to get victory over, you'll hear me say to you, don't hang out with people with bad habits, because you'll become like them. The more you converse and talk with people who use bad language, the sooner one of these days, one of those words is going to jump out of your mouth. We become like the people we hang out with. Now, this is different, because Jesus wasn't going to hang out with him. He was going to spend the night with him. He was going to have an evening meal, spend the night, probably have breakfast, and then be on his way. And they said, he's going to be a guest with a sinner. I'll have to tell you something. I don't know if I've told you this before. It's been about 14 years now that I've been doing this on the internet. Before that, I was a member of something similar, but it didn't have a broadcast. It was like a group, and the people were friends, and they would put up a little video or comments and ask each other questions, and it was a friendly thing, but it wasn't video like this. And it closed down. It was called Live Digital. it closed down, and that's when I learned where I met, I think, Larry and Jacob, and some of the rest that I've known all these years. A lot of people went there, and a lot of them also went where I'd been and knew me, and they said, "Come over to this place. It's really great, and you'll love it." And so I went over, and I'm looking around, and then some of them that knew me from Live Digital said, "You know what? They have video, and you're a preacher. I'm sure you could do it." And I started looking at it. Is this something I would want to do? It was brand new to me. Well, how do I say this? There were some who were featured for the day. It wasn't like here where we're featured for 20 minutes or so. And they would be featured for the day, and you would have young, good-looking girls, and they would be and then you'd go to another one and you'd click on it, and they're telling dirty jokes. And I said, wow, do I want to be between a posing girl and a guy telling dirty jokes, and I'm in the middle and I'm preaching? And I was trying to figure out whether it was appropriate, whether it's something I should do. And then, like the Lord's telling me, did I say go in all the churches and preach the gospel? No. I said go into all the world. And if you've got a guy telling dirty stories on one side and a girl posing on the other side, you're in the world. Anyway, Zaccheus stood and he said to the Lord, people had heard about Jesus long before they saw him. There was no television, there was no newspaper, certainly no internet. But people have been talking since the Garden of Eden. He'd heard of Jesus, undoubtedly heard what he preached. Plus, he's a sincere person. His heart is now open to do whatever the Lord leads him to do. And he says, behold, Lord, remember what I've said before about that term, Lord? We don't make God God. God is already God. He existed and has always existed. He was never born. He's always been. But the term Lord is like the term my boss, the person I allow to be in charge of me. And that's a decision you make. And if you call somebody Lord, it shows that you understand who they are and you're putting them in charge. Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. We read previously he was rich. Half of everything he's got, he's going to give to the poor. And if I'm taken anything from a man by false accusation, if I said you owe $10 when he really only owed $9, then that dollar I'm going to give back fourfold. I'm going to give him back the dollar. But I'm going to give him another dollar and another dollar and another dollar. Now this is not percentage. tithes and some other things are dealing with percentages. This is 4 times that. And Jesus said to him, this day salvation is come to this house. I don't care how many trips you make to the altar. I don't care how many evangelists you have said the sinner's prayer with. When you get the real thing, you change. If there is no change, nothing happened to you. Oh, you walked up, you looked religious a little bit, you maybe even got baptized or something. But when you get born again, your heart is changed, your life is changed, everything about you is changed. Jesus said, this day salvation has come to this house, for as much as he also is the son of Abraham. What does that mean? It means he's a Jew. For the Son of Man, who is that? That's Jesus. Jesus is calling himself the Son of Man. Until the very end, he admits he's also the Son of God. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which is lost. Now, I told you we were going to get to the triumphant entry. We have a couple of things before it starts, so I better hurry. I don't want to take more than 15 minutes doing this for a couple of reasons. This is a parable. It's in Luke 19. Luke is the only one that discusses it. A parable is a story that Jesus would make up. If he's trying to teach you something that's hard to understand and you can't grab the concept, if you get it in a parable, Jesus says, well, you know, if you don't understand this, it's kind of like this. It's like a cat has these kittens. Or something that you understand about, and then on the basis of that parable, you understand more. As they heard these things, Jesus gave them a parable, and because they thought that the kingdom of God would immediately appear. The kingdom of God that was predicted, both Old and New Testament, so these people already know about it, is the 1,000-year rule of Christ, which will happen 7 years, maybe a couple of months after the rapture of the born-again Christians. He said, a certain nobleman went to a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. A man's going to go to another country and become head of it. And he called his 10 servants. And he gave them 10 pounds. And he says, occupy till I come. Now, this is a story Jesus is teaching because he's trying to teach them something else. He's not trying to teach them about kingdoms and countries. He's trying to teach them something else. He gives each of them 10 pounds, and he says, occupy till I come. Get busy. Do something. But I'm coming back. The citizens hated him. And they say, we'll not have this man reign over us. We don't want this man to be our king. And it came back, when he came back, he commanded the servants, and he said, all right, I gave you so much money. What have you done with what I gave you? The first said, Lord, the pound that you gave me gained 10 pounds. I was talking earlier about a businessman who knows how to deal with people. Borrowed $1 million from his dad, turned it into so much money that today he and his wife gave $1 million for the Harvey, Texas, and other surrounding states that are suffering because of Harvey. And he said, well, good servant, you've been faithful. I gave you a little, but you were faithful. And because what you were faithful, what I gave you, I'm going to put you over 10 cities. And the second came and said, well, you gave me a pound and now I got 5 pounds. Hey, the first guy had 10. This one only made 5. And he said, I'm going to put you over 5 cities. And another came and he says, you gave me a pound? Here it is. I wrapped it up, took good care of it. I put it in a napkin. I was afraid because you're an austere, a well-known, important person. You take up things and you lay things down. You're a busy man, and what you do stays done. And reapest that thou didst not sow. You don't even work very hard for your money. And he said to him, out of your own mouth I'm going to judge you. You just said what you did. I'm not going to ask anybody else what you did. I'm not going to ask the next. What you said, I'm going to make a decision on that basis. You knew. You're calling me an austere man? You knew I was an austere man. That I lay things down and I pick things up and I reap what I didn't sow. In other words, somebody else is doing the reaping of the sowing. Why didn't you put the money in the bank? That at my coming, I would have at least had some usury. Most of us know what it is to pay usury to a credit card company. You don't have the money, you use a credit card, you buy something for $10, but by the time you pay the credit card interest, you've really spent about $12. He said, if you'd have just put it in a bank, that 1 pound, at least it'd have been 1 pound and something, a little interest. And he said, take that pound away from him and give it to the one that had 10 pounds. Why 10 pounds? He's already got a lot. Now he's over 10 cities. It's because he did more with what he had. They all had the same amount, but one man did more. Maybe he worked harder. Maybe he was a little smarter. Maybe he had good friends. But they all started out equal. And this one did more. He said, give it to him. And they did. And he said, to everyone that hath will be given, and from he that hath not, even he that shall be taken away from him. But those mine enemies would not that I should reign over them. Bring hither and slay them before me. And when he had spoken, now this was just, this never happened. Okay, never happened. It's a story. Jesus is telling the story because he's saying, whatever I give you, do something with it. Don't just do nothing. The more you do, the more success you have, the more you'll be rewarded. Now we come to a couple things before the final entry into Jerusalem. John writes about it in chapter 11, and then the second thing that happens, John writes about in chapter 12. Jesus now comes to Bethany. Bethany is 2.5, 3.5 miles from Jerusalem. Passover was near. What Passover? You know the Passover, the blood on the doorposts. When I see the blood, when I see the blood, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. That's what they were about to celebrate. Remember, they had to hurry up and get Jesus down off the cross and get him in the tomb before dark. Why? Because as soon as it got dark, it was Passover. So Passover was near. Many went out of the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They had things they did similar to John's baptism. They had big tanks of water, and they would get down in them, and a number of Jewish things. And some of them had another reason for going early. They sought for Jesus and spake among themselves. They were looking for Jesus, and among themselves they were talking. As they stood in the temple, they said, what do you think? Will he come to Passover? Will he be here? Now, both the chief priests and the Pharisees, big wigs in the Jewish faith, said, if any man knows where he is, you better take us to him. Now, he goes on to say that 6 days before Passover, that's about a week, Passover was going to begin Friday night. The way we speak of a week. And many people had heard that Lazarus had been dead and raised from the dead. Now, we did that already. This is just a reference to it. So they wanted to come and see who Jesus was, but some of them also wanted to see a guy that had been dead and it was now living. Because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Now, one thing more happens before the entry into Jerusalem that we call Palm Sunday. Jesus is now anointed. That means oil has been poured over him by Mary. Who's Mary? Well, remember Lazarus had two sisters, Mary and Martha. One of them always did the cooking and the housework when Jesus came, and the other one would just sit in front of Jesus all the time and listen to him. That one was Mary. The one that did all the cooking and said, get my sister in here and get her cooking. That was her sister Martha. This is the 12th chapter of John. We just read from the 11th chapter of John. There they made him a supper, and Martha, served. Jesus went from the kitchen. But Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. And Mary, the one that was always listening in case Jesus would say something important, and she didn't want to miss it, she had a pound of ointment of spikenard. You have any idea? If you get something this size, that's that kind of ointment or something, do you have any idea what this costs? She had a pound of it. Now, they weren't poor, but she had a pound of it. Very costly. And she anointed, she poured it over his feet. And then she took her hair down. And she took her hair instead of a towel. And she wiped the ointment from his feet. With her hair. And the house was filled with the odor, the smell of the ointment. Then said one of the disciples, oh yeah, they're always trying to save money. Guess what his name was? Judas Iscariot. He's the one that's going to betray him. This ointment could have been sold for 300 pence and given to the poor. You're putting expensive stuff on somebody's feet. You could get money out of this. And if all you want is doing good, think of all the good you could do with the money you could have got if you'd have sold this. He didn't say this because he cared for the poor. Then why did he say it? Because he was a thief. He had the bag. He was the one that took care of the money. Like, I'm always looking for a bargain. I don't pay full price for anything if I can't, unless I can't get it in on a sale or in a thrift store or somewhere. And he bare what was put therein. There was money in that bag, and he's carrying it around. That's where his brain cells are. That's what his mind is saying. Jesus said, let her alone. Against this day of my burying, she has kept this. You're going to have the poor with you always. There will always be poor. But you will not have me. I need to close right here for a reason. I believe that with the new things that are going on with me in YouTube, I'm limited to an hour, and I'm now at 58.5 minutes. So I need to close this right here. So until the next video, blessings on you.